Our next speaker is Elena. Say your last name again. Sanjarova. She's from the Ukraine. She saw a lot of changes there that she's starting to recognize here. And again, very impromptu, but she wanted to just kind of fill us in on some of the things that she's been noticing. Thank you.
Hi everybody, my name is Elena Sanjarova, and as you can hear, I speak with an accent, so if I get excited and start speaking too fast and you don't understand the words, start waving at me. But I came to this country, now I'm actually a US citizen, and I came to this country about 17 years ago in August of 1992 from Ukraine. So I know that, for me standing up here and speaking to you today is not a big deal because it's kind of like preaching to the choir, right? I assume most of you who are here do not believe in the change that we can all believe in, right? Is that a yes? I personally don't believe in that change. But let me tell you why so many people do and why I think it is our responsibility, each and every person who came here, to say to other people who do not see it coming, what is coming very clearly, very honestly, and very truthfully. The reason I came to this country 17 years ago was because I grew up in the Soviet Union, where once you were born and went to school, went to kindergarten, went to preschool, the first thing that you were taught how to lie. You knew the truth down in your heart, the common sense, whatever you would call it, how things work in this universe, the moral laws, whatever you would call them, right? You knew the things that are true, and they're kind of inborn in each individual. I do believe those are kind of given to each of us by God. And each of us, even if we didn't have ever read a Bible, ever heard a word pronounced in the Bible, or any other religious text, I think they would all be put into our hearts, and I think they are. So being born, we already know the truth. However, when I was born in the Soviet Union, growing up there for 22 years, I was taught to lie. I lied when I joined the Young Pioneers group because I knew I had to go to college. I lied when I joined the Young Communist League because I knew I wanted to go to college. I joined other organizations because I knew my parents could lose their jobs if I didn't, and so forth. So you don't believe in those socialist principles, but you actually end up saying that you do just to preserve your family's well-being and your standard of life, I guess. So that's one thing that ends up being when you live in the socialist country. And I've heard people, when our new president was elected, I've heard such things saying, when I would tell them, a lot of the rhetoric coming from the campaign trail sounds very socialistic to me. People would not believe to me. And then actually I have a friend, a co-worker who is from France, from Madagascar, but she's from France originally. And she told me, so it will be like socialism, like in France? What's the big deal? And I just kind of looked at her. I'm like, well, that's not why I personally immigrated to this country. I did not immigrate to France to live in a socialist society. I came here to the United States because I knew this is the last country where there is liberty and there is capitalism and whatever is the most pure form that there is left. Which brings me to the point, if this becomes socialist country, where else do we go? Where do I go from here? There is no place to go. We cannot afford to lose this country, okay? This country got to stay free, and it got to be a capitalist country. Let me tell you how quickly it can turn from a communist country to a socialist country. People told me also during the election, oh, it will take for years to come. This will be so slow. This will not be like Soviet Union overnight. It will be a long process. And anyway, it will not be like Soviet Union. Don't worry about it. It will be more like France again, or like Sweden, or, God forbid, Venezuela, right? Hugo Chavez. But anyway, I'll tell you how quickly it happened. I'm from the part of the Soviet Union called Ukraine, which were very independent kind of Cossacks. These were the people who fought for the independence of Russia. They were independent warriors, free from the Tsar. They would temporarily take assignments from the Tsar, but they all lived kind of like on the homesteads, on their farms. So that's how my family was. We had a farm. They had guns, right? You have guns, so you think people cannot take away your liberty if you have guns, right? No. But let me tell you what happened. when the collectivization started in the former Soviet Union in 1929, and I didn't know the story until I was about 19 years of age, when the Soviet Union fell apart and my grandma finally told me her story. But their farm was expropriated in 1929 because Stalin decided that to forge the society, the forward-looking society that he was building, they really couldn't afford to have such a backwards production as those independent farmers were. It had to be all collective farms. Does it ring a bell? Cap and trade, anything like that? We cannot afford the dirty energy. You know, it got to be all very forward-looking, green, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, what I wanted to say is that they lost the farm, right? The farm was taken away. They were kulaks. They were the rich farmers. Their mistake was to hire 2 people to help on the farm. The farm grew large enough. They had a lot of family. They had about 8 kids, so they were working it as hard as they could themselves. They hired 2 people to help. They lost their farm. They got loaded into the freight train. The freight train, when they realized where they ended up, it got them unloaded close to the city closed Arkhangelsk. That's your homework. Go to the city, to the map of Russia, look up where Arkhangelsk is. So from the south of Russia, from Ukraine, they were put on the freight train, transported like cattle to Arkhangelsk, were unloaded in December on the ice. What my grandmother told me, they were given axes so they could chop down the fir trees, so they could basically supply the energy needs of the beautiful Soviet utopia, socialist utopia. Anyway, I think when people started dying left and right, from what my grandma told me, they realized they're losing too much of the labor force. So they put some kids, at least, and some older people into the families' homes, and that's how my grandma survived. She was about 8 at the time, so she survived. She escaped. Her father managed to bribe the collective farm, or whatever it was called, the manager. She escaped to Ukraine back when she was 18. So she made it back. When she made it back, she concluded telling me the story with the words, "Elena, you know, when I came back to Ukraine and I got to my village, I realized that we were lucky." I kind of looked at her and said, "Grandma, how? You know, you lost your farm, you lost your house, you lost your cattle, you lost at least several family members, from what she told me, up there in Arkhangelsk. How were you lucky?" She said, "Well, when I came back to the village, I realized of those people who stayed, who were not rich kulaks, about half of them died out. And what happened, you know, Ukraine resisted very heavily to collectivization. So what happened, they closed off the borders and they induced the famine. They took away all the grain, all the cattle, everything. They induced the famine. So about 5 million people died in the course of 2 years. So when she came back and put on her new shoes, the only pair of shoes she had to look decent back in the village to which she came, she realized there was nobody to show those shoes to. Almost nobody who remembered her. All of them were pretty much dead. And the reason I told you such a long story is not really to get any sympathy or compassion or anything like that, but to illustrate how quickly it can happen to people. They had a farm, they had their property, they had guns, they thought this could not be happening to them, you know? They used for centuries, they were free on their land, they didn't have any czars, they didn't have any rulers, they were just independent farmers and Cossacks, and they thought the 10 of your neighbors, your co-workers, your relatives, your brothers, your sisters, and to tell them about the truth, because the utopia, the socialist utopia, sounds very beautiful. It's so easy when somebody else takes care of you. At least that's what it sounds like. What it turns into reality, it's really horrible. You need to hear people from Ukraine, from Russia, from Romania, from Czech Republic, from Eastern Germany tell you what the socialist utopia is in reality. It's torture, it's loss of millions of people's lives, it's loss of property on massive scale. It's the inability to say anything that you believe in. It's just not a pretty reality the way it sounds from the loudspeakers on the campaign trail. In reality, it is a horrible, horrible truth that hurts so many countries and so many millions of people all over the world. And I personally do not want to immigrate again. I came to this country, I want to stay here. Please, let's not turn this country into a socialist country so people like me do not have to move again. Thank you.
guys, this is why it's so important that we get educated. Not just us, but the people, everyone voting that knows it's not worked before. These policies have failed in the past, and until everyone voting understands the consequences, we won't see any real changes. So thank you very much, Elena.